we're going to just wait maybe one more minute for maybe one additional senator, and then we'll get started. Galleon, true. Okay, I think we've got a representative membership here in the committee, and we're going to start with our fiscal briefing from our friends from the Department of Legislative Services. Tanya Zimmerman is here, and Zimmerman, I'm going to just turn it over to you, and you've got somebody to help, I guess, with the slides, and the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Looking at the first page of the fiscal briefing, this particular chart looks at the overall spending in the fiscal 2027 budget. Overall, the spending increases by about $505 million. General funds decrease by $154 million. However, there's about $322 million of general fund deficiency appropriations that are related to fiscal 2025 costs that could not be absorbed within the 2025 budget. If you exclude that from the fiscal 2026 spending, the budget would increase by about $168 million in general funds. The federal fund decrease is also driven primarily by those fiscal 2025 costs. The special fund increase is primarily comprised of three items. There's about $357 million increase in Blueprint for Maryland's future fund spending on education, about $287 million on transportation, and about $70 million to administer the paid leave program. The governor's spending plan leaves a general fund balance of about $108 million and a rainy day fund balance of about $2.17 billion, or 8% of general fund revenue. The administration's budget plan, including revenue and spending adjustments, have a combined impact of about $1.5 billion that are contingent on legislation. And page 2 provides more detail about what those adjustments are. So before the legislative action, there would have been a projected closing balance of about negative $1.4 billion. The revenue adjustments total about $357 million. This includes two items to fully or partially decouple from tax provisions in the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. The largest of these relates to a depreciation allowance for production property, which would bring in about $2.5 million. There's also about $72 million of various land and open space programs that would be diverted to the general fund, and they are replaced in the capital budget with general obligation bonds. There's about $586 million of transfers to the general fund. The largest of these transfers are from the Strategic Energy Investment Fund, totaling about $292 million. $259 million from the alternative compliance payment account in SEAF, and about $33 million from the administrative account. There is a proposed transfer of about $188 million from the Fiscal Responsibility Fund. These would otherwise be used for capital projects being transferred. And then there's about $70 million from the Bay Restoration Fund and $13 million from the Waterway Improvement Fund that would be transferred to the general fund. But both of those are replaced with general obligation bonds. There's about
Yeah, why don't we do, I think actually that's a good point. As we go through this, as opposed to you going to the very, very end, we can take questions along the way, okay? And so, we'll go Senator Gallion, then we'll go Senator Washington, okay? Thanks
Sure.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you. I was just looking, so it looks like I looked at the open space programs that's now going to be used. Bonds are going to take that funding. So basically, we're borrowing money to pay for open space programs now, and the money that would have went to them is now going to the general fund?
for fiscal 2027.
Okay, and it's the same thing you said with the capital projects, which under fiscal responsibility fund, that's...
So the Fiscal Responsibility Fund is a transfer. There is not a specific bond replacement for that activity, but the Bay Restoration Funds and the Waterway Improvement Fund that are being transferred are being replaced by general obligation bonds.
So some of these things that were funded regularly through like dedicated funding sources, like I guess, last year it was passed that it was $100 million taken out of Project Open Space, Maryland Ag Land Preservation, that kind of stuff. So that went to the general fund. So something similar is happening now, except we're basically having to borrow money through bonds to pay for what used to be just out of the regular lines. Is that correct?
Yeah, these are just fiscal 2027 actions, so it's not a permanent change.
Okay, but we haven't done that in the past on these, right?
Well, I would have to get back on the kind of more specific history, but there have been times, I think, when some of these programs have had bond replacement, particularly for like program open space.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Senator Washington.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for doing this every year. This is really, really helpful. Senator Gallion's questions was really, I was going to ask those questions as well. And so I wanted to better understand Okay, so this is the, just to be clear, this is the operating budget. And the bonds would usually be in the capital side of the budget. Is that correct or no? Can you?
Yeah, so the bonds are in the capital budget. Most of it replaced this year. I think there is a portion of it that's pre-authorized for next year's capital budget.
So then there will be, or what, I guess when we get our briefing on the capital budget, we'll see those transfers or reductions from the capital budget, or is this creating new money? I think I want to better understand what replacing capital bonds for operating.
So this is replacing funds that are in the operating budget with the general obligation bonds. So this is these for the program open space, then land items in the Bay Restoration Fund and the Waterway Improvement Fund. The funds are decreasing in the operating budget, and the capital budget includes the replacement of bonds or pre-authorization for
Just one more question to make sure that I understand. So typically, so this is the operating budget. These aren't investments that are going to last 15 years or 10 years. There's some kind of formula about what's capital usually and what's considered operating.
These are capital. This is capital funding in the operating fund budget typically. So these are capital eligible projects that are being funded in the capital budget.
So okay, so Bay Restoration Fund has projects in it that are funded with capital dollars and operating dollars.
This year they're being funded with capital, but these are there are capital appropriations using kind of in the operating budget for a variety of activities, and there continue to be in fiscal 2027. It's just that these particular ones are going to be funded with general obligation bonds. So
and is there somewhere where we'll get the total amount of capital that's being used to support operating expenses in this year's operating budget?
So there are a variety of, there is some information in the fiscal briefing document about that. There are really every year, there is some degree of it. We get federal funds to support capital activities. There are other special funds that support capital activities. There is some general funds that support some capital activities. PAYGO funding. The amount of those can vary year to year, particularly on the general funds, depending on the availability, but there are throughout the budget and every year some capital related spending in the operating budget.
Okay, all right, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, additional questions? Senator Huss, okay. Why don't you simmer and keep going?
Yep. There's about $593 million of spending reductions contingent on the enactment of the BRFA. There's a full detail beginning on page 24 of the document, but just to highlight some of the major items, about $450 million of that reduction is related to suspending for fiscal 27 only the required appropriation to the rainy day fund. There's about $39 million to reduce the state share of teacher, community college, and library retirement. There is also a $27 million reduction related to funding the disparity grant at the fiscal 2026 formula level, as well as about $21 million related to capping growth for the community colleges under the formula to 3% per year. Turning to page 3, this is looking at the structural outlook. So the negative numbers indicate that the ongoing spending exceeds the ongoing revenue. The administration's plan reduced the structural shortfall compared to what was projected by DLS in the December forecast, and did more than meet the spending affordability committee goal. The structural shortfall is about $394 million in fiscal 2027, increasing to about $2.3 billion in fiscal 2028, and it continues to grow through fiscal 2031, where it will exceed $4 billion. In the out years, the administration's plan has a structural shortfall that is higher than what DLS had forecast in December. That relates to drivers of that are employee salary and benefit expenses, teacher retirement, and human services spending. Page 4 looks at kind of in a large view how the governor resolved the $1.6 billion projected cash deficit, and that occurs both through revenues and transfers that are contingent on legislation, as well as $1.3 billion of spending reductions. Page 5 shows kind of what those areas of spending reductions are. As I mentioned, about $593 million are related to items in the Budget Reconciliation and Financing Act, but there are other areas of spending that is lower than DLS had forecast that don't require legislative action. The one area is about $171 million related to Medicaid and behavioral health spending. There's also cost containment in the Developmental Disabilities Administration of about $150 million. The budget also does not provide for rate increases for health or human services providers, and provides a 1.5% COLA rather than a 2% COLA. There are areas of increased spending relative to the DLS forecast. There's about $269 million of various initiatives and enhancements that are shown in more detail on page 6.
Okay, just real quick, just one, the Vice Chair, because we have some legislation, both House and Senate, from Chair Corman, myself, and Senator Augustine on the WMATA funding topic. So just, can you just give me a little more meat on the, specifically on the pie chart on the WMATA capital? I mean, WMATA Metro. Yeah, Metro, it's our DC Metro system, AKA WMATA. Just give us a little more meat on the bones on that.
Yeah, so on the WMATA capital, the CIP last year assumed that the $167 million that's provided to WMATA for capital just as part of the regular requirements would be funded with general funds. The budget, the capital budget provides that through general obligation bonds. It was provided through general obligation bond funds last year, so it provides, it just frees up general funds, but it is fully funded with capital funding in the capital budget, as it was last year.
Okay. Actually, that's a number I think that's going back to the bill I sponsored from 2019, 2018. That 167 has been, I think, okay, that's the target of some other bills that are floating around here. Okay, why don't you keep going?
Okay. So looking at some of the enhancements, there is about $30 million for legislative priorities. There's $30 million in fiscal 2026 for emergency facility maintenance at the Department of Public Safety and Correctional Services facilities, as well as $12 million for Allegheny County infrastructure repairs. Many of the remainder of these items are related to various economic development type activities, though there is funding also to help address repeat audit findings and expand the Enough Act. Turning to page...
Senator Washington.
Yep. See something, the AstraZeneca facility, can you, so this is a new expenditure?
It's, yeah, so they're expanding their manufacturing facility in Frederick and building a new clinical manufacturing facility in Gaithersburg.
I think it's going to be like a $2 billion investment into the state of Maryland, so this is a, well,
Yeah. So was there a bit, yeah, I guess I'm trying to, how did that come about?
These were discretionary enhancements that the governor has included in the budget.
Okay. And are there enhancements or are there projects that that have received reductions in the governor's budget? I think you showed us a couple of.
Yeah, so there are areas both that require legislation to reduce because they were mandated funding levels, as well as other discretionary items that were reduced or lower than were forecast in the DLS forecast that are not necessarily a decrease. They may be level funding or just lower than what DLS had forecast. So there were decreases there are decreases in the budget, but the budget does provide some discretionary enhancements as well.
Okay, all right, thank you.
okay.
Okay. Turning to page 7, the top portion of this looks at some of the spending related to or some of the use of the Strategic Energy Investment Fund in the budget. Combine the actions in the budget would reduce the balance to a projected $164 million at the close of fiscal 2027. There's about $333 million used for budget relief, including the transfers that I mentioned earlier. There's about $30 million supporting capital projects, as well as other fund swaps of about $11 million. There's also about $392 million of new investments. This includes $100 million for ratepayer credits, $100 million for solar and clean energy projects to backfill federal cuts, as well as about $42 million to assist the higher education institutions to focus their energy or their research on energy resiliency and climate activities, and $25 million to implement the Energy Resource Adequacy and Planning Act that was enacted in the special session, as well as a variety of other initiatives. There's additional detail on those on page 21 and 22 of the document. There's $359 million of increases related to K-12 education funding. About $228 million of that is discretionary funds from the Blueprint Fund to hold schools that are covered by the community eligibility provision harmless from declines in the free and reduced price meal counts. There was a change under state law. The way that that was counted would have changed in fiscal 2027, leading to decreases. And this returns the count to the way it had previously been counted, reducing the impact. There's also overall decline in enrollment, which is dampening education aid growth. The full-time equivalent enrollment drops by about 1%. English language learners decreases by 4% as well. But all school systems except for Garrett County receive an increase in direct aid. On the top of page 8.
Let's stop there. We'll do Vice Chair Kagan and Senator Washington.
Thank you. Ms. Zimmerman, thank you, as always. Thanks to everyone at DLS. And I'm sorry I didn't get your name.
Emma Kozak. Emma Kozak.
Thank you, Ms. Kozak. Can you speak just a little more broadly about the English language learners? The cut in the funds allocated for that from the blueprint, does that remotely reflect a cut in the demand and the need for that? Because I would guess it wouldn't.
So the decrease I mentioned was the enrollment. There was an enrollment decrease, which does impact the funding that's provided, but it's based on the enrollment.
And is that remotely do we expect that that's birth rate? Do we expect that that's people scared to send their kids to school because they're shifting to private or parochial schools? Do we have any understanding of how that would be such a significant drop in 1 year?
It's likely a combination of factors. There was an overall decline in enrollment, as well as the English language learners. So it is likely a combination of factors.
Okay, appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, Senator Washington.
Thank you. And you probably get these kind of questions in the Budget Committee, but we're the policy committee, and we would hope that policy drives our budget. And so I'm attempting to better understand, and I hope our committee can as well. So in the section around the K through 12 education funding, that's stated as an increase. This $228 million, is this a one-time appropriation? I guess first.
There is funding for this year. There is there is legislation that does, I think, change this, but I believe that change is just for the 1 year.
Okay.
But there is legislation
Right.
around that.
And then
topic.
what is the community eligibility provision?
So that's where all the students in a school receive the free meals based on the.
So there was a provision in the Enough Act that I didn't notice last year when we passed it, that required a report about updating the methodology for calculating eligibility and the compensatory gaps. Is this my understanding, I read the report, is that the methodology that was chosen on one hand may say that it undercounts, but it counts differently poverty. Does this gap or this required additional money, is that connected to that at all, or is it separate?
It's separate.
Okay.
So this is under state law, kind of separate from that study. There was to be a change for fiscal 2027 about how community, these counts, the compensatory education counts would occur for community eligibility provision schools, and that drove a decrease. And so this is kind of returning to the kind of prior law for this year.
Just for this year. All right, so thank you. So if you could share with me where that provision is, and so I can kind of gather these, I appreciate that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, let's keep going.
On the top of page 8, I'm just going to highlight one of the bullets here. This relates to the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. The fiscal 2027 budget includes the first impacts of that on state spending. Total, there's about $56 million in state funds. The largest share of that is $43 million in the Department of Human Services to cover the increase in the state share of the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program administrative costs. The match changes beginning October 1, 2026, so that 75% will be covered by states compared to 50% under current law. And there's about $13 million related to changes related to the Medicaid requirements. The impacts of these will continue to grow in fiscal 2028 due to additional cost sharing requirements and kind of the full year of the administrative match. Turning to page 9, this looks at some of the legislative issues related to the budget. The first is the long-term sustainability of the budget, given the structural shortfalls. The second relates to the uncertainty surrounding the ongoing federal policy changes, as well as whether there will be additional federal employment reductions or reductions to aid to state government that could adversely impact the economy or the budget. The next bullet highlights a couple of provisions in the One Big Beautiful Bill Act for taxes that are not part of what the governor has proposed decoupling from, that could be decoupled from to produce additional revenue. The first is related to allowances related to research and experimental expenditures, and the second relates to business interest. Another concern relates to the adequacy of the funding for behavioral health. As I mentioned before, the budget anticipates about $170 million less than DLS forecast in December. The demand for these services has surged over the last 2 years, and we're still exploring the adequacy of the funding. At the close of fiscal 2025, the Office of Legislative Audits identified about $1.4 billion of federal revenue in the Department of Transportation that they did not have supporting documentation for. They're working to determine how much of this is recoverable, and there is a risk that state funds would be needed to backfill a portion of that. That concludes my presentation. I'm happy to take any additional questions.
Okay, we're going to start with Vice Chair Kagan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. 3 things on page 9 completely jump out and looks like we are heading into a deep, deep hole here. And whether or not it's FY27, it looks problematic. First off, I'm a word nerd and a grammar geek, so I am noting that you use the word surged, not just increased. Can you give an idea, please, as what it looks like? The demand for behavioral health services by adults enrolled in Medicaid has surged over the last 24 months. What are we talking about there, please?
I don't have the exact percentages. I can get back to you with more detail. We have looked at utilization of various services that have grown over the last couple of years compared to prior experience. And there has been significant utilization growth. The fiscal 2025 costs came in higher than expected as well.
So if demand is surging, what happens? Because I assume that supply isn't keeping up, or am I wrong? So what happens if someone really needs behavioral health care and can't get it?
So these are the costs. So this is part of the Medicaid program that we're talking about. So if someone is seeking services, the funding is covered as an entitlement. Any Medicaid eligible services that they're seeking or have received would be reimbursed. If there isn't sufficient funding in the current year budget, there would be a deficiency appropriation to support those costs, as there are in the fiscal 2026 budget to pay for fiscal 2025 costs.
So just while I've got that, before I shift to the next topic, I just feel like I need to say in this room the importance of 988, and I just hope that the state is putting out that and educating people about the availability of a suicide and mental health hotline that is 24/7, 365, and so that if they are waiting for mental health care and can't get it, that is an option, and we need to make sure word gets out about that. And I hope that that MDEM and the Department of Health and everyone in state government is helping put that out there. I want to shift to the last bullet on page 9, please, and thank you for flagging about the Child Victims Act, about sexual abuse lawsuits. 12,000 claims filed before the deadline, and enormous potential liability for which the state has no dedicated resources to fund. What does that look like, and what's the timetable, please?
I don't have specifics on the timetable for when those would be needed. I believe they're still working through.
But it won't be FY27, or it will be? Or do we know?
I think we don't know yet.
Okay. So we are constitutionally required to balance the budget. That's a lot of TBDs on important and expensive line items. Is that something that, it's just that, I'm not trying to be a jerk here. Is it something that you don't know but others do know, or are we just waiting for more data that we don't have yet at all?
With this particular topic, I think they're working through the cases, so I think that there's not more information kind of available at this time.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Any additional questions for Ms. Zimmerman? Senator Washington.
Thank you again for the big overview. I just want to ask a couple questions about the state aid on education, just how it's calculated so that I can better understand. So the community the community provision there, is that part of an overall formula to determine the amount of state aid a LEA gets from the state, or?
Yeah, so the particular formula that is being impacted by the way that this is being counted is the compensatory education funding formula.
Right. And so I think that's where I wanted to ask you about the report about possible neighborhood indicators, alternative ways to calculate poverty, because it's sort of our proxy for poverty, right? That report was put out. Did it change how we calculate it? Because one of the issues was analyze how other states calculate eligibility for state programs who participated in the federal community eligibility provision. Is that something you know, or about how it specifically how the choice in calculation and methodology impacts the budget?
In terms of that report is not impacting how it's calculated this year.
Okay.
I think there would probably need to be legislation to change how it's counted.
Okay, all righty. So, but is it something contemplated in other legislation that you're aware of that's coming forward, either from the AIB or the administration? Are these formulas and the way that we calculate poverty or the compensatory education, is that included or being considered in other legislation?
My recollection is there is legislation from AIB about the counting, but I believe it, along with other, I think, blueprint related changes, I believe it is just impacting the 1 year related to the compensatory education. I would have to look more
Okay, all
into
right.
the
Thank you.
specifics
Thank you
of
so
that.
much.
Okay. Additional questions? Senator Hester.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to ask about the note here that the Office of Legislative Audits identified $1.4 billion of federal revenue assumed by MDOT for which there was no supporting documentation. Can you guys speak to that?
So they looked at both the State Highway Administration and the Transit Administration, and some of their closeout entries, and determined that this level combined between the two of them didn't have the supporting documentation. Some of it is that about whether they spent like maybe more than was authorized, but it's like there were costs were higher, and they are just in the process of seeking the approval to get the reimbursement. So MDOT is kind of working through how much of that is recoverable, and
Bills in place with the state agencies to either make sure that they're getting the documentation when they spend the money, or not to like overspend by $1.4 billion?
So the audit related to the fiscal 2025 closeout does identify MDOT along with a few other agencies where they didn't have kind of supporting document for some of the entries they made at closeout about whether they've received it and reconciling some of those accounts. I think all of the agencies that were identified are working through to determine how much of those funds have been recovered, as some of the funds may have been recovered, and they just hadn't quite matched them up yet at the time that the audit was being produced. There is, for some of these agencies, the department is likely to continue to look into kind of where they are in terms of where they are in recovering those funds.
Okay, Vice Chair Kagan has a question or two.
Thank you. Just confirming you're done with your part of the presentation. You're not going to go through future pages in this packet, right?
Yeah.
Okay, then could we go to page 26, please? So, as my colleagues are aware, because I talk about it all the time, 3 people have died in my district when 911 has failed, and I've been working on Next Gen 911 for the past 11 years. I guess this is my 12th year. The most shocking, disturbing, concerning item in the governor's budget is reflected on page 26, which proposes, in contravention of the Carlhan law, of taking money from the 911 fund, which is only specifically supposed to go to 911 expenses directly to our 24 counties. And it proposes to give it to overhead and salaries and stuff at MDEM, the Maryland Department of Emergency Management, most of whom are not directly, indirectly for sure, 1 or 2, but not directly used for 911. And we're talking it was $3.2 million plus for each year, and you've got the 2-year for FY '26 and '27. It is shocking. It also endangers our federal funding because no federal funds go to states that ever use 911 fees for any other purpose than 911. I've had a lot of conversations with stakeholders, and so it would be irresponsible for me not to mention it here in public stream in addition to the private conversations. My question for you, Ms. Zimmerman, and again, this may be an item that you're not able to answer, but are you aware of a FEMA funding update, which is part of what caused there to be kind of a desperation move to take the money from the 911 fund? Do you have any updates, or is this just a public statement that will hope that our colleagues strip this out?
I don't have a specific update. I know that this provision, along with a provision expanding uses of CEF to support MDEM, are related to concerns about the availability of federal funding to support their operations.
I think there has been bipartisan alarm in Congress, actually, about FEMA not providing local funding, because every jurisdiction, every state receives FEMA funding when there's an emergency, and we certainly need it for the Maryland Department of Emergency Management. So flagging that publicly and deeply concerned. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, additional questions? Seeing none, thank you to both of you coming in today. That concludes our briefing, fiscal briefing for DLS. So we're going to take a break at 11 a.m. We will have a briefing from DNR, Secretary Kurtz and his team on forest management and tree planting. So that will be at 11 a.m. So be back here in 15 minutes. And in the meantime, we're good.
Bless you.